Today, we wish each other good Yom Tov. Today, friends, is the 12th of TAMUZ, YUD TAMUZ in Hebrew. And YUD TAMUZ is the birthday of the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. And on this day in 1927, the previous Rebbe had been arrested by the communists, imprisoned and interrogated and beaten. So you all know the story. They had passed a death sentence on him, sentenced him to be shot by firing squad. That was deferred, I guess the word is, to 12 years exile in Siberia. That was changed to 3 years house arrest in a city called Kostroma on the Volga River. And when he arrived there, and we've told the story many times in detail, so 3 days later on his birthday, he was told that he was free. And you all know the story because we talk about it every year, and I'm sure you've all read it independently. In fact, it's an entire book. There's a wonderful book called The Heroic Struggle that tells the story, mostly in his own words, because the previous Rebbe spoke about it and wrote about it in his diary, parts of which he allowed to be published. And it's published under this book called The Heroic Struggle. So this morning, kind of a Fabrengen in honor of the occasion, I'll tell you a story or two. The night of the arrest, they arrested him. It was after 10 o'clock at night. He just sat down to his first meal of the day. When they came to arrest him, and as we all know, unfortunately, tragically, those that arrested him and interrogated him, and those at the vanguard of the persecution of Judaism in the Soviet Union were Jews, tragically. Seduced by the allure of communism, not very different to the liberal left today, same principles. We will enlighten you whether you like it or not. So this one story to zero in on is our Rebbetzin, the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, and the critical role that she played, and the critical role that our Rebbe played. What happened was, so the officers came and turned the house over and arrested him. And our Rebbe was coming to the apartment, and he saw the lights were on everywhere. This is already now late at night, maybe close to midnight. And he realized that something was wrong. And the Rebbetzin, they were engaged at the time, the Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka. So she opens the window, and she announces, Schneerson, referring to her fiance, our Rebbe. She says, Schneerson, we have guests. The Rebbe understood what this meant. So he ran then, the Rebbe went, this is the middle of the night, on the streets of Moscow. This is taking your life in your hands as a chassid, because what he did was he went to all the key chassidim, secretaries, and informed them that the Rebbe had been arrested, the previous Rebbe, and hence all incriminating documents had to be immediately destroyed. And he went from place to place, knocking on the door. He had to climb up the back of apartment buildings. He can't be seen going into an apartment building at 11 o'clock at night, 12 o'clock at night. So just to be on the street then and do what he did was took his life in his hands. But he managed successfully to alert the ones that had the documents, the evidence. The evidence, of course, was, let me just explain to you. The previous Rebbe was guilty by default. That's before any interrogation. They knew what he was doing. What they were after was the addresses of all the underground yeshivas, the names of the teachers. How was he paying for them? Where was the money coming from? The previous Rebbe was the number one enemy of state. He was keeping religion alive, and Judaism, which was the number one enemy. And so they all had the letters and correspondence and so on between the previous Rebbe and the Chassidim, the teachers, students. So it was all destroyed, so that the communists did not get their hands on it. This is the night of his arrest. So I'm just going to share with you a story. Some of you may be meaningful, I hope for all of you. I shared it this morning at the Shir. In 1963, at the YUD BEIS TAMUZ Farbrengen. So this Farbrengen took place a few months after my great uncle's brother died. My great uncle's brother's name was Pinchas Altos. I'll show you a picture of him. He is it's an almost legendary figure in Chabad, but not legendary in the sense of tall tales being told about him, but legendary in the sense that he was he was a great chassid. Here's a picture of him, if you can see. I don't know if you can see it there. This is my great uncle's brother, affectionately known as Pinya Altos. So Pinya Altos was a kind of a secretary, worked as a secretary of the previous Rebbe. Secretary does not mean some, like you think of a secretary as dictating, taking the, I mean he worked in of the previous Rebbe. And he was very involved in the whole arrest and liberation. It seems also that he accompanied the Rebbe that night that I told you to the different Chassidim. He also went with the Rebbe. He was subsequently appointed by the previous Rebbe, was a very great man. After the war, 1948, after the Second World War in 1948, even before that. So he was the representative of Chabad in Israel, and he was the prime individual responsible for the establishment of Kfar Chabad and the creation of Lubavitch, Chabad, and the various institutions in Israel. The picture I just showed you is actually lifted from a Farbrengen attended by the first president of Israel, Zalman Shazar. That's the bigger picture, the context of that picture. Pinya was a colorful figure, a chassid, totally devoted to the previous Rebbe and then later to our Rebbe, though he was older than our Rebbe. And they worked together, as you just heard then in Russia, as the closest, as it were, Chassidim of the previous Rebbe. working, I shouldn't say closest, there's nobody close and nobody far, worked closely with the Frierdiker Rebbe. So Pinya died in 1963, between Pesach and Shavuos of 1963. To give you just a snapshot of who this chassid was. I hope you can appreciate this. So he was a great, as you heard, you're getting a sense of a tremendous communal leader, activist, etc. A very charismatic man, great sense of humor. He wasn't renowned for his, I say this in relative terms, scholarship or piety, relative. Compared to you and I, he was a big scholar and very pious. But I'm speaking relative to the great Hasidic figures of his day. It wasn't what he was renowned for. And as mentioned, a great sense of humor, always a smile on his lips, and very quick and very witty, and was endeared by the fledgling Israeli government that really helped then for the funding and the purchase of Kfar Chabad and its funding. I think it was not purchased, it was granted by the government, but securing this was a village, that this should be given to the Chassidim to make Kfar Chabad, which became the nerve center of Chabad's activities throughout Israel, which today is, I don't know, many, many, many hundreds of institutions throughout Israel. Many hundreds. So, colorful figure, very warm and engaging. But when he would fabrein and say a little l'chaim and sing the soulful Hasidic melodies of longing and attachment, and there was actually a tape of him singing. Rivers of tears would just silently flow from his eyes. And he used to say, at these fabrengens, he would say that, not every time, but he may have said it once, maybe twice. He said when his time comes and they bury him, he wants the Chassidim to sing at the funeral, the burial. They should sing a Chassidish nigun. He may even mention which one. They should say l'chaim, and they should pour some l'chaim into the grave for him too. Don't forget about me. And they did that. He's buried in Tzfas, and the Chassidim gathered around. He was much beloved by everybody. And the Chassidim were heartbroken when he died. The whole Chabad world. And they gathered around as Pinya had requested, and someone started softly to sing. He was a very, very wonderfully talented musically, as was his brother, my great uncle, who was even more so than him. Shmuel Betzalel, Shmilik, as we called him. But this is Pinya, the brother. So someone started softly singing one of his nigunim, and slowly everybody joined. And someone produced a little bottle of vodka, and everybody said l'chaim, took a sip, l'chaim Pinya. And the one holding the bottle poured a little bit. Hope you can appreciate this, friends, because, okay. So now back to what we're talking about is the Fabrengen by the Rebbe in 1963. It's a few months after he passed away. So the Rebbe by the Fabrengen is very, very, very unusual. Number one, the Rebbe did not mention Hasidim by name. He didn't refer to contemporary Hasidim. He was one and there was one other. Not only by name, but by his first name. And this is what the Rebbe said. Amongst those that were involved in the whole story of YUD BEIS TAMUZ, which Pinya was, Pinchas was his name, Pinchas Altos. Pinchas Altos, it was called affectionately Pinya. The Rebbe said, amongst them was Pinya, and he said his name, Pinya. He pauses, his voice is thick with emotion, and he says, Pinya. That's really. And then he said, that certainly now Pinya is present at the Farbrengen of the previous Rebbe in heaven. He's participating. And he is, and then the Rebbe said, and there's a niggin that Pinya liked to sing. I'm not going to sing it now, but Ikoisilach and Bracha. Maybe there are some people that Rebbe said the Farbrengen now that know this song. He's asking him to sing it. And surely Pinya is singing along up there. That the Rebbe should reveal a chassid who just passed away, that he's by the Farbrengen now, by the previous Rebbe in heaven. And that we'll sing the song here now. He will sing along with us. This is most extraordinary. But that's what the Rebbe said. And you can, the Rebbe's Farbrengens are recorded. You can hear the Rebbe say it with such emotion. It's one of the very exquisite moments. One story. Okay, story number one. Related to today, YUD BEIS TAMUZ, a story of Rapinya Altos, who is singing along with the Chassidim here in this world, the Rebbe's Farbrengen, at the Farbrengen with the previous Rebbe in heaven. Now, second story. This is 1958, some years earlier. There was a chassid. His name was a Beryl Baumgarten. If I'm not mistaken, he's an American-born boy. Beryl Baumgarten was the shliach to Buenos Aires. In those days, he was one of the first shluchim sent by the Rebbe on shlichus. Rabbi Beryl Baumgarten, I'll give you a picture of him. If you can see him, it's a picture of him at a wedding, some simcha. So the Beryl Baumgarten, as I just told you, was sent on shlichus to Buenos Aires. Now the Rebbe told him, amongst his work was to visit to Brazil, which is north of Buenos Aires, Argentina, to go to Brazil, and to visit there. I forgot there's a Spanish term for cowboy. I forgot what it's called. But there were many Jews there. This is in the 50s, Jewish cowboys who worked, I guess, on ranches and who had their own ranches. And they made a good living, which is why they were doing this. But they were, very Yiddishkeit, very far. There was no Jewish infrastructure. So the Rebbe instructed Rabbi Baumgarten to visit these villages and towns in rural Brazil to bring Yiddishkeit. Now, to go from Buenos Aires to where he had to go, there was the river. I also forgot the name of the river. And in those days, the way to cross it was no bridge, at least at the point where he had to go. And they went on a raft, a boat with a car. But it was very primitive. I won't say third world, but not quite up to the standards of North America, perhaps. So the story is as follows. It was YUD BEIS TAMUZ today when he's going. Now waiting for the ferry, it's a ferry, kind of primitive ferry. There were two Jews there. So the Pinchas starts to the Beryl Baumgarten he starts to approach them, to talk to them, Yiddishkeit. They were Holocaust survivors, both of them. This is the early 50s, it was 1958, the late 50s. And they got very angry at him, even bringing up Yiddishkeit. No God, we're survivors. And not only were they angry at him, they were very antagonistic. And it was hurtful. It was hurtful for him to encounter Jews, antagonistic and angry and cynical. they were very impolite, to put it mildly. Anyway, they're waiting for the ferry, and okay, he kind of moves away from them. There was no point in engaging in discussion further. It was just, on the contrary, they were heaping insult on him. So there's a post office there. It was YUD TAMUZ. And he's feeling really down, Rabbi Baumgarten, Beryl. And he sends off a telegram to the Rebbe. And it just simply says, it's YUD TAMUZ. He's on the way to visit the rural Jews in rural Brazil. And he's asking the Rebbe should have him in mind. That's what he wrote. Very short thing, is a YUD TAMUZ. Didn't write, I'm down. It's a telegram. Didn't write anything about the encounter with these guys. Just, he sent out the telegram. Now they go on the boat. Now the time to drive on. Now you can get out of your car, and there's a section for people, or remain in the car. He decided to remain in the car because he didn't want further interaction with these two fellas that he saw was just escalating, and there was no point. So he's sitting in his car on this, what did I call it? It's a ferry. And it was hit by a banana boat. They're called. And his car slides right off the ferry into the water. Beryl Baumgarten did not know how to swim. Now we know the story because he told the story himself. And he's going down. He related later, he told to his son and others. People say this, his whole life went before his eyes. Previous Rebbe, our Rebbe. And then he's thinking, this is the end. This is just the most incredible part. I hope you'll appreciate this. And he's thinking if he should say the video of the confession, the Jew says before he dies, which he knows by heart. Then he thought, no, it's YUD TAMUZ, it's a yontif, and on yontif, on YUD TAMUZ, they don't say the confession. It's called tachanun. So he's not taking it. He's not saying it, I'm sorry. This is his thoughts, friends. He's thinking as this is the last moments in the world. There was an air bubble still in the car. The water hadn't come in yet. Sealed. So there's still, oxygen in he's before he passes out or before whatever it is. His last thoughts were, do I say confession or not? And it's not, it's Yom Tov today. It's Yom Tov today. I'm not saying Tachanun. The next thing is the window bursts from the pressure of the water as the car is sinking. Now, mind you, another important detail is that famous falls, can look it up, which is right there. That's the end. But even before that, the man doesn't know how to swim. And the water is going towards the falls. It's the highest fall in Argentina. It's a famous fall. It starts with an S. And then he feels it bursts, the window pane bursts, the water is rushing in. And he feels that he's being grabbed by his collar and pulled up, and he shoots like an arrow to the top. And they fish him out of the water, they get him out. They were watching this. They managed to get him onto the boat, and he was in the hospital and released. Now, there's many parts to the story. The two Jews that were antagonistic or witness to this whole thing. So when he was hauled out and so on, it was already at night. So it's Pinya wanted to, other Jews, to make a minyan to daven. I think it was before they even took him to the hospital. He wants to daven. And these two Jews joined the minyan and were crying. And they said, we do this route often. We cross the river, and it happens that a car slips off the boat, and there's never been a survivor. So Pinchas, he goes to the hospital for a short time. They release him, and he continues in his mission to visit the Guch or something, if I'm not mistaken, the Jewish cowboys who worked on the ranches. Now, here's the amazing part, my friends. While this is happening, if I bring in New York, YUD BEIS TAMUZ, it's all on tape, you can hear it. And in the presence of hundreds of people, 1,000 people, in the middle of the Farbrengen, while they're singing a song, the Rebbe says, where is Beryl Baumgarten? Where's Beryl Baumgarten? Everybody knows where he is. He's in Shlichus in Buenos Aires. The Rebbe sent him there. It's like a rhetorical question. He said, no. He turns to his brother, Mendel Baumgarten, who just passed away. Mendel Baumgarten lived in Crown Heights, just as an aside. His home, like a Chabad house in Crown Heights, many hundreds of Bali Tshuva ate, slept, and lived in his home over the decades. Anyway, the Rebbe turns to the brother Mendel and says to him, say l'chaim for your brother. And he indicates in a big cup. You should say l'chaim on a big cup. Okay? Didn't the Rebbe says, say l'chaim for my brother. He said, l'chaim, obviously. The Rebbe says, l'chaim livrach. When a year later, Beryl Baumgarten comes to New York, is in Yechidus. So first of all, he finds out that the moment when the Rebbe turned to his brother and said, say l'chaim for your brother, that's when this whole thing was happening. And he felt that he was being yanked out. The Rebbe turns to his brother, say l'chaim. I remember hearing this story as a child, because this is an incredible story. And then this is the beautiful part at the end. When he went into Yechidus, this a year later, came to New York, and he walks in, the private Orient Rebbe smiles and says to him, no, was I thinking about you? I didn't think about you. Because he sent a telegram from the post office there. Please have me in mind at the Farbrengen. Amazing story, obviously, on so many levels. It's amazing, of course, it's the miracle of it that the Rebbe felt this and saved him. But not equal, but also a huge part of the story is the Chassid himself. His last moments, what's he thinking? Does he say Tachanun, the confession or not? And decides no, because today's a Yom Tov. And he thinks this is his end. Just tells you the level of this Chassid of the Rebbe's Chassidim. You also have to appreciate, to pick up and go from New York then to Buenos Aires in those days. On a one-way ticket. And he had many, I don't know, in the hundreds of Bali Tshuva that were inspired by him and his wife and children. Today, Chabad Buenos Aires is an empire. Chabad Argentina, Brazil, it's an empire. But it was he was the founder of Chabad at least in Buenos Aires. So here's two YUD BEIS TAMUZ stories. The story of Rabbi Altos, who was singing his niggin in heaven with the previous Rebbe in 1963, and then the second story, YUD BEIS TAMUZ 1958, crossing the river. You know what, if I could find it, someone just said, but the river is, they found it. I don't see what that says.
Izuagu.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah, it's the highest falls there. That's where this crossing took place. So thank you, Ricky. So you heard a story of YUD BEIS TAMUZ of a chassid of 1958. The bottom line, my dear friends, just 1 second. Okay. Is today YUD BEIS TAMUZ. It's a very powerful day. I mean, the previous Rebbe, when you consider what he faced and the sacrifice of the previous Rebbe and the Chassidim, the previous Rebbe once remarked that the sacrifice, the most difficult aspect of that whole period was not just that he put his own life on the line, but that his own Chassidim and that those that were disappeared and never seen again were replaced by another chassid. This was the most difficult part, obviously. But this all bore tremendous fruit. 70 years under the Soviet boot, Yiddishkeit, the ember was still there and burst into glorious flame when communism overnight vanished, as our Rabbi foretold it would, publicly. I remember it was in 1989, the year earlier or so, the Rebbe was calling that in Israel and calling upon certain Chassidim, my brother-in-law was involved, to prepare for a great influx of Soviet Jewry, and also particularly for the academia of Soviet Jewry, that they should find employment in academia and science in Israel, and to build apartments. What's the Rebbe talking about? Apartments. An organization called SATEC was established, and then overnight it all collapsed. The great exodus began. And the very government that had oppressed Jewish life is now supporting it. Synagogues given back that had been appropriated by the government is now given back to the Chassidim. Shluchim are being sent. And Lubavitch in Russia today is, I don't know, can't give you numbers because it's growing exponentially in cities, schools, but orphanages and day schools and camps, yeshivas, huge community centers all over the length and breadth of Russia, including Siberia, including Kostroma, where the previous Rebbe had been sent on house arrest. It's one of the great miracles of our day, a revolution that happened without a shot being fired, and how the Rebbe foretold it and prepared for it. I remember Gorbachev remarked to who was, I think, Professor Branover. He said, "Believe me, I didn't know this was going to happen this way." How did the Rebbe know? I didn't know. It was going to happen under Gorbachev's watch. The dissolvement of communism. So the message is, friends, here we live in a free country, and now too in Russia. So the trick or the challenge is to have this kind of sacrifice that the Chassidim had then, to have it now in a healthy, good way, which means simply not to be satisfied with accomplishments, to constantly push the envelope, to reach out to our fellow Jews and spread and strengthen Yiddishkeit. That is the blessing and the power that this incredible day of YUD TAMUZ gives. So I'll conclude with wishing you all a good Yom Tov, as we traditionally do. It's actually 2 days, today and tomorrow, because in Kostroma, when he got the word he had to report every day to the police station. It was a house arrest, but they told them, this is all 3 days after he arrived. They told them that they got a telegram from Moscow free, but because it was a national holiday that day, the actual freedom was the next day. So we have a 2-day Yom Tov. He was allowed to take with him one family member. Who did he take? Our Rebbetzin Chaim Mushka, his second daughter. Conclude with one final story. So he had sent ahead a chassid ahead of him. As soon as he got news that he was being sent there, with instructions to gather the Jewish community there, to make a cheder and to fix the mikveh that had fallen into disrepair. For the very things he's arrested, he does under their very nose, as he's going to his place of house arrest. And he saw his file that had been sentenced to be shot. Now, who does he take with him? As I told you, the Rebbetzin, Chaim Mushka, and another chassid, Yosef Chaim Altois, the one that he's an uncle of Pinu that I told the story earlier. So the story goes that when they got the word from Moscow that he'd been cleared of all charges and just freed, an extraordinary miracle. One rabbi more or less didn't make a big difference to the Soviets. And as for the world pressure, and there was, after 3 days or a week, they'll forget about it too. And yet, they let him go. So back to the story, when the word came, so Rabbi Eliachayim, altos, started to sing and dance outside the GPU office, the GPU office. The song that he was singing in Russian words, which is the rallying cry, the anthem for the Chassidim in Russia for 70 years, and still in Russian, Yet Nikavo Krom Yivo Adneva. We don't fear anything or anyone, only Hashem Himself. Yet Nikavo Krom Yivo Adneva, famous Chabad song, which we sing often in MTC. In fact, this Shabbos we sang. So they were singing this song and dancing outside the office of the NKVD when they got the news. There were the previous Rebbe. And there was a child present, just walking by, and he saw this whole celebration, singing, dancing. So the child, joining in the celebration, that story goes, did a handstand and was walking on his hands on the brick fence around the NKVD office. Imagine the scene. This kid's doing a handstand, Rabbi Eliachayim is dancing, Nyet Yekavo, and the Rebbetzin is, I guess, dancing in her way, and they're dancing, celebrating the victory of the previous Rebbe, which in his own words is the victory of the Jewish people and the victory of every Jew. And he said, the previous Rebbe, at the train station, when they took him under guard to go to Kostroma, this is from Moscow, he made a speech, a defiant speech, and it says in front of the officers and the soldiers, he says the following words: the nations of the world should all know that although our bodies can be exiled, our souls can never be exiled. We are free. No power on earth can imprison the soul of the Jewish people. Hashem sent us by divine will. We were sent into exile, and by divine will, we will leave exile. He's saying even the body is temporary. Even the body is a temporary exile, and we will leave. And these are the words he thundered, that the nations of the world, with these words, you got to know that we are not, our soul is never imprisoned, and the bodily imprisonment is temporary, and redemption will come. With these words, he got onto the train, accompanied by the Rebbetzin, as I just told you. There are endless stories. As I told you, this wonderful book, which if you don't have, you should get, called The Heroic Struggle by Professor Ben-Zion Alter Metzger, or Alter Ben-Zion. And it's a wonderfully inspiring read that I encourage you to read and to share with friends and family. Good Yom Tov, and have a wonderful day. Good seeing you all. I'll do the gallery so you can all see each other. Those who can be seen. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks
Thank
for
you
joining.
for sharing, Rabbi. It's very
Bye.
inspiring. Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining.
Good Yom Tov.
Good Yom Tov.
Good Yom Tov, Rabbi. Good Yom Tov.